Welcome to the Myofascial Health Podcast, hosted by me, Unu. Follow along as I explore the depths of John Barnes' myofascial release approach on my road to mastery. Along the way, I'll be sharing the lessons I learn as I open my myofascial release practice in Austin, Texas, so that you don't have to make the same mistakes I do. Welcome back to the Myofascial Health Podcast. Now, I'm joined here by a very special guest. She's been an occupational therapist for 53 years. She's done MFR for 35 years. She started her own MFR practice in 2009. It's my honor to introduce Judy Rosevear. Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, now I remember meeting you. And it was in advanced unwinding right before I took MFR3. And this particular seminar was very interesting in the fact that it was an advanced seminar, but there were many people in this particular seminar who were forcing and leading the patients. And it was kind of spoken about. And I remember it was the last technique. It was a 4-person unwinding, and 2 of the people in our group, so it was me, you, and 2 other people, they were kind of leading. And I know that I was a lot younger and early on in my MFR journey, and I felt like because I was trying to give feedback, these older people didn't take to it because I was much younger than them. And I remember you just being like, "You're forcing! You stop forcing!" And I was like, whoa. And I was like, wow, that's like, you just went to it. So can I just start there and ask you, how have you been able to develop an ability that I perceive as holding your boundaries and not feeling bad about it?
I think probably the biggest thing, every time I walk into the room, I'm a beginner. And I walk in the room and center myself with the person and just mentally say to myself, I am here for this person, and let them do whatever they need to in order to heal. And I take all of the stuff away from myself and just allow them to go where they need to go. And I'm the catalyst that's allowing that to happen.
I love that because oftentimes I struggle with holding boundaries, and it's because I feel bad. And I remember when you were just like, "Stop doing this." It's like, oh, wow, I don't think I would have ever approached it like that. I don't know if it's because you also had this really cool MFR hoodie on that you're like, oh, this is Judy. This is Judy right here. But when you said that, I was like, man, I don't think that I would have ever done it like that. And I think sometimes you do need to be firm at the boundary. You know, we're always waiting, but sometimes you do need to be firm. And I remember in that moment, I was like, I think I should learn from this. And, you know, you learn from everybody around you. So even though you were connected and kind of directing that energy towards these other 2 participants, I very much got a lesson out of that. And I think you don't ever know who's watching you and who's learning from you. So for anybody who might feel like you're feeling insignificant or that you don't matter or are worthy, there are people that you don't know who notice you. So I just want to say thank you for sharing yourself in that moment. And I learned a valuable lesson there.
Well, thank you. Glad it was successful. I didn't realize I was quite that forceful, but I guess I do what I need to in the moment.
That's right. Now, can you talk us through how you even first got into myofascial release?
I'd be happy to. So I was in a practice. I was seeing a lot of variety of people, and I knew that there had to be something more because I was treating these people and they'd look really good at the end of a session. They'd come back the next session and they'd be right back where they were. And I'm like, there's got to be something that we're missing that will allow them to be able to keep what they gain and move forward with their life with improvement and not having to redo the same thing over and over. So my partner at the time was a physical therapist, and she went to one of John's classes in Vermont, and she came back and she said, I think I found what we're missing. And so the next year, John did the series in Chicago, and I'm kind of cautious. And so I went and took MFR1 and realized during that 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 was what we were missing. And so then I started taking the classes, and a few years later, I was invited to teach the pediatric class. And so I had to have everything in order to do that, and was a little apprehensive about doing it because I didn't think I was a teacher. And I still have my doubts sometimes. But with that invitation, it pushed me out of my comfort zone to have to become who I wanted to be. And now I can't imagine my life without doing myofascial release. And I think the biggest thing is I not only talk the talk, but I walk the walk. So I do my own self treatment. I use my balls. I do my stretches. And I always recognize that when somebody is doing their exercises, it's like, stop, look at what you're doing. Was it easy getting to where you were going? And they usually say no. And I'm like, then let's go a little slower. Let's really be aware of where it goes easily, and then allow yourself to stop there and reach out, do an eccentric contraction, and allow your body to allow you to go further.
I love that.
Yeah, people have taken their lives back and, been able to become who they want to be and not hopefully be on all the medication that they were on before.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And let's unpack a lot of that because you said a lot of things that I would just like to go a little bit deeper. One thing that comes to mind is John will say, without awareness, there's no choice. And so you became aware of myofascial release, and you maybe had this hunch of like, man, the things that we've been doing haven't been working, something's missing. And so you go to John's MFR1 class in Chicago, you mentioned, and you said, this is the thing. Can you take us to that moment where you're in class and whether he's teaching it or demonstrating it, what was that moment of resonance where you were like, this is the thing that has been missing?
Probably when I went into some of my own stuff and had these visions of something that I was totally never aware of. And it was a little scary. And it was like, what the heck is happening? And as I've continued my journey, I realized that our bodies are so capable of doing what they need to do in order to heal if they're just given the opportunity.
Absolutely. And can you share what that vision was? Do you remember?
Oh, yes, very vividly. He was doing a psoas release, which is, of course, a muscle that runs from our ribs down to our groin. And my partner was just very gently placing their hands on me. And all of a sudden, I had this vision of this entire cauldron of snakes. Just the snakes were just like, how you see the pictures of the snake just curling and going up? Well, that was the vision in my head. And immediately, as you have said earlier, I'm a little gutsy. And so I went up to John and I said, I'm sure you saw what happened. And can you tell me what it was? John says, how do you feel? And I said, I have a feeling inside of me that I've never felt. And it's just, I guess I could say it was just a feeling of freedom and just an openness. And with that, he said, then who cares? It doesn't matter what it was. It's gone. It can't affect you anymore, and just enjoy it. And I took that away. And as I treat people and they ask, did you see anything? What happened and what was it? It's like, it doesn't matter. Take where you are now and run with it and enjoy it.
I love that. That resonates very deeply. And I think something to echo is, again, you never lead or force. And why I mention that is I think normally when someone's like, what does that mean? Then it kind of makes you feel like you have to give the answer. And what John so beautifully did and taught us is he said, what did you feel? So he didn't say, this is what I saw and this is what it means. He said, what did you feel? And then you were able to connect with that and you felt this freedom in your body. And then he said, well, then who cares? And I think that there is such a level of genius in that because a lot of times we get stuck in these stories that we tell ourselves and we say, oh, well, this means this, or this happened to me when I was younger, or my parents did this. And something that has been asked is, what if you did know? Like, is that going to change who you are? And as long as you feel the freedom, that's what's important to move forward with the joy, as opposed to getting lost in this story and these belief systems that keep you stuck there. And I think another thing that you had mentioned, whether it's treating with patients or yourself, is, even though you might not have the confidence that you are able to move forward because it's who you want to be versus who you've always been. And you said you had to step outside your comfort zone. How are you able to do that? Because I think that often feels uncomfortable. And that is happens to be where growth is. And so, did you work through maybe feelings of insecurity or inferiority? And then ultimately, you were able to get there, and now you teach a PEDS course. Is that correct?
Yes, very much so. When I was asked to teach the PEDS course, I was like, no, I don't do public speaking. I don't like to be in front of people. That's not what I do. But when you're teaching something that you believe in and that you do every day and that you live, it becomes really easy to be able to share it with others.
And how would you have told that to your younger self who didn't believe that?
I wish that someone had treated me as a newborn and I had started out my life totally different than what I did. But I figure each of us are on our own path and the things happen that are meant to happen and they happen when they're supposed to happen.
Absolutely. I think sometimes when you get caught up in whether it's the belief systems or maybe these traumas that have happened to you, you feel like, man, I wish I wasn't this way or this didn't happen to me. And that will shoot yourself in the foot because you can't change the past, but what you can change is how you respond to it. And so I think you today, you have this wisdom where it's like, I wish these things would have happened. And the value of MFR spreads to everybody of all ages and even in utero, meaning inside of a pregnant stomach. But we didn't all know this at that time. And it's cool for me to hear MFR therapists say things like, oh, my granddaughter has been treated in utero and since she was an infant until all the way now, and you can see that she's a little bit more free spirited. And that's not a liberty that we've all gotten, unfortunately. I wish we all had that. And to hear you say that now, but not want to change anything, I think that you embody the MFR principles because it's exactly that. You would have liked things to be different, but everyone's on their own path. And then there's this acceptance. And something that I believe, and I think it resonates with what you just shared, is everything does happen for a reason. And everything that you're not makes you everything that you are. And so you never want to be in a place of envy where, like, man, I wish I had this thing or this person had this. And it's like, that doesn't help you in any capacity? And so if you can distance yourself from that envy, which is one of the cardinal sins, it's like, then you have this joy that you can actually move through. And then what you realize, if you have the perspective, is no matter how bad you think your situation is, there is someone who is wishing they had the blessings that you had. It's like we complain a lot about everything. And it's like, oh man, I'm having to do these house projects because home ownership is all this. And it's like there's someone who's living out of their car. It's like, I wish I had a house to live in. And that person who's maybe living out of their car is thinking, man, I have to live out of my car. And someone in a hospital is like, I was in a car accident and I can't even walk or move. Like, I wish I had the ability to do that. And so it's all about perspective. And if you can just be grateful for the things that you do have instead of being ungrateful for the things that you don't have, you will be able to move through life with more of an ease. Do you have anything to share on that?
Yes, definitely. And I think people are so quick to live what they've been through and keep reliving it and not realizing that they can allow themselves to go into it and be able to tell the story without it creating a pain in their bodies. And if we can give that gift to a person at a younger age, then they're going to be able to live the MFR principles throughout their whole life. And I think the saddest thing is when you ask an older person as they're lying on the table, what part of your body do you feel the most? And they open their eyes and look at you and they say, my head, as if there's a right answer, because they're so out of touch with allowing themselves to feel inside because of all the pain that they've probably gone through. And so I just feel like MFR gives you a gift to be able to feel safe, feeling into your body and allowing it to move and do whatever it needs to in order to become a better body and to be able to function better in this world.
Absolutely. Now, I often have these patients who are out of their bodies. When I ask some of my patients, like, what are you feeling? And they'll say, nothing. I don't feel anything. And I'll have to say something like, can you feel my hands? And they're like, yeah, I can feel your hands. Like, okay, you feel something. And then you recognize like there's a disconnect between their minds and their bodies. And the way that John teaches the mind is it's not your brain. He believes, and I believe, and I think we all believe, that every cell in your body has consciousness, and that consciousness is your mind. And so if you are thinking of it linearly, like, oh, the mind is just the brain, then we're talking about two completely different things. But if you're in myofascial release, and in channel 3 we call it, then you recognize that consciousness is everywhere. And so when I find that this person is very disconnected and they're kind of in their heads and they're not feeling, sometimes it can be challenging to get them to feel back into their bodies. How do you coach someone to embark on that journey, especially if they've had traumas and pains where when they feel it, there's a lot of fear there?
I try to teach them, and even the really young kids, as young as 3, I'll teach them where you come down your breastbone or your sternum and you go into the space just below the xiphoid. And even 4-year-olds can feel that little bone and go into there and then have them cup their hand and just lean forward. And it's like, now take a breath. Can you feel that breath in that part of your body? Because so many people breathe so shallowly that they never expand their ribs and feel down into their ribs. And so that's one of the first things that I'll teach somebody. And the little child that can't sit in preschool, I'll just say, when you start feeling like, you just want to run and not sit with the teacher in circle time, just, take a moment just to put your hand there and lean forward and say, I'm okay.
That resonated with me deeper than what you just described because as you were saying that, I am now feeling my own xiphoid and seeing if it expands and contracts. And then I can notice my breaths are deeper because I'm actually more aware of it. And it's cool that you are using this in your area of expertise, which is with kids or pediatrics. And yet, this is being applied to myself because sometimes, and this is maybe based on some of my traumas in adolescence, I get this feeling that I have to flee. And I'm sitting here just tuning into that, and then I can tell myself in these moments where things are feeling very intense that, hey, everything is okay. And that is then me doing my own self-treatment. And I think that whether it's, this fight or flight response, it could be applied to an adult or even a kid. And even though the circumstances are very different, like a kid is just having to sit in class and they just want to run around, you can just have them be there and like, hey, everything's okay. Versus an adult like myself, where, I'm not sitting in a class, but I have these triggers that are like, you're not safe. And you need to either fight or flight and get out of there. If I could just reconnect, because that's me feeling this impulse, and even though it feels real, I can center myself because that awareness of I'm off center, this feeling that I have to flee might not be authentic, can I come into my body, feel my breath, and tell myself that it's okay? So thank you for that. What other things have you noticed between adults and kids where either one group is more receptive, or do you find like, hey, everyone is receptive to it? It just depends on how you receive it.
I do think eventually everyone's receptive to it. I think the children, because so many things have been done to them and not with them, well, actually, even adults become very aware at very quickly that the MFR approach is different than all the other approaches they've had. And people, especially adults, will come to me and they've been to 8, 10, 20 different therapists, different doctors, and have never had a chance to be touched. And I find that very disheartening that we have turned into a world of doing things to people and not with people. And I think that's the biggest thing, that as we fulfill the MFR principles and are with a person, that we enhance their understanding of it's safe to be touched and to allow that touch to heal their bodies.
I think that human touch has more value than we give it credit. And I think you see that definitely in kids, like they just want to be hugged, and to just show them that, hey, they're safe. And whereas maybe not every child has that experience where things are being done to them. And so then they mistrust this sense of touch and this connection. And if you are in myofascial release and you're doing it the way that it's taught with the principles, and you're not adding any of your own belief systems into it, then you have this ability to just sit with someone in the mud. Something that I'll say is you're not doing MFR to somebody, you're doing it with somebody. And so they also have to be a willing participant. If they're just on the table and they're just sleeping and they're out of their bodies, like we're not getting anywhere. Like I'll keep taking your money, but this isn't what this is really about. It's like we're here because if you want to heal, you have to also be in charge of that process. We don't heal anybody. We just change the environment for them to heal themselves. And sometimes it's just being there with somebody, feeling someone's presence and their attention and their compassion that allows them to feel safe enough to explore these spaces that they've repressed because it's been too painful. Now, I wanted to ask you, your area of expertise is with kids. And I love how you speak about that, and you're always coming back to that. Has that always been part of your life? And then MFR has accentuated that? Where did that sense of purpose come from?
Yes, I've always worked with children, and I've always felt like children begin their lives many, many times with a very difficult start. And so the younger we can treat that child, the more they're able to live the life they would like to live instead of the life that they were given. And I see a lot of kids that have been through a really difficult birthing process, a lot of moms who have had a lot of scares during their pregnancy and that. And to see them be able to accept that that is done, it's over, it's done with, and they don't have to carry it with them the rest of their lives, that they can become who they want to be. And yeah, I can think of a lot of examples of where MFR has given them a whole new perspective on growing.
Can you share one of the examples that maybe mean a lot to you?
Yeah, one was a little one who the mother had been told when the baby was 6 months old that it would never grow normally and would always have problems. And that person just contacted me on Facebook and is now an elementary teacher, teaching third grade, doing very creative things. They love to fish, And so they do all of their lessons with a small kids pool and fish and teach every concept that they should be teaching in a kindergarten classroom. And it's just very enheartening to know that I might have been a part of that when they were 6 months old and the mother was told they would never be anyone.
Wow, that is huge. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that you were a part of it. I think maybe there's a sense of humility or humbleness, but if they reached out to you to let you know that, I'm sure that you are definitely a part of that. And I love that because I think school can get very boring. And so for them to use their creativity in something that they like to do to teach a concept that maybe gets a lot of kids to like kids who aren't able to focus to be able to play a game or focus on something like fishing while learning, I think that is a level of genius that they've tapped into. Now, something that you shared is it can start in utero. And then as soon as they're born, then continuing on myofascial release treatment, not just for the newborn, but also for the mother. It helps both. I hope to be a parent someday. And with that, I feel there's pressure. And, I think I've failed at a lot of things in life. And if there's one thing where I'm like, dude, I just don't want to fail at this one thing, it's being a father. And you don't know what you don't know. And so that's where this lesson again, without awareness, there's no choice, becomes really important because I could say, hey, I was raised the way that I was raised and I turned out okay. And so, hey, let's just do it. Versus what I've come to learn now is like between the ages of 0 and 3, like where they're barely talking, they will develop a sense of how safe it is in the world at all for the rest of their life in this pocket from 0 to 3. And I'm like, wow, that is huge, right? Then I have to say to myself, how can I foster that environment of safety between those ages of 0 and 3 versus the person that I think has been shaped by society and pressures is like, you have to work, you have to do these things. And I want to make sure I don't lose sight of what's actually important. And I think those of y'all who have families will say that the family is super important. And then between the ages of 0 and 7, they develop their sense of self, their personality, who they are. And, I think that it can be very stressful adding this new thing to your life, a busy life, I might add, and say, how do you then add raising a child in that amongst everything that's happening? And so I definitely have some maybe unrealized fears about that, and maybe I'm just overthinking it, but I just know that, like, wow, you want your kids to do well in life and all these things, but those ages between 0 and 3 and 0 and 7 are way more important than I think we give credit to. Can you share on your body of work and knowledge on that specific topic?
Well, our fascial system is the very first thing that develops in utero. So as soon as we're conceived, that sheath of fascia lays down around that embryo as it starts to grow. And as a mother is pregnant, many complications can occur. And every one of those complications puts an imprint on that baby. And so if the mother can be treated during pregnancy, then that baby receives energy from the outside to enhance the process of development. And if all of a sudden the mother's in labor and they announce she has to have an emergency C-section, that fear that she has is transferred to that baby. So the younger that we can treat that baby after they're born, the quicker their body can balance and be able to tell the story when they're older of what happened when they were born, but it doesn't become a part of them and a piece of them. And they can continue developing along a more normal base of development rather than the abnormal base of development that they might have been developing along.
I need to hear this. And it's just because I didn't know that the fascial system is the first thing that develops. It doesn't surprise me because your fascial system is kind of like the walls of a maze. And then what develops inside those pathways are like your organs and your muscles and all these different things. And it's so cool to think of it like that. And something that comes to mind is that our society will teach things in small parts. And John calls this fragmentation, where we believe that if we break things down into smaller and smaller components and we understand the smallest components, then we'll thereby understand the whole system. And that is completely false because things aren't separate systems, they all work together. So to have a specialist in this thing and a specialist in that thing and not anything that ties them together, you're just fragmenting the human body. And you can't do that other than the words that we use to speak. And so to honor the fascial system and say, hey, this literally touches and connects everything under the skin from head to toes, through your muscles, to your organs, all the way down to the cellular level. This fascial system is something that is super important. It's not just packing material that has no use. It is something that holds our consciousness in the ground substance that John teaches. And so to understand, like, hey, this is what develops first, and the emotions that the mother feels will get imprinted on this fascial system and has an influence on development is blowing my mind. I never thought of it like that. So that's just really cool for me to now conceptualize and allow me to have some sense of control in terms of, I have these fears and it's like, oh, well, if I just treat them, I can help them decipher and work through these things without being attached to maybe the stories. And I think that that goes without saying in these spaces, but I think for those of us who are new to myofascial release or maybe have just barely understood fascia or heard of fascia, this is very enlightening, not just for myself, but for anyone who may be new to this work. Now, what if, and this is me playing a hypothetical, what if the mother by nature is pretty fearful? And you're telling me, the mother's emotional states have a direct influence on fetal development and the baby. What would you recommend in that situation?
Well, definitely that the mother be treated and be allowed to think that she is not controlling anything, that nature is controlling it, and she doesn't have to worry as much about taking her vitamins, eating right food, and just send a sense of love into that baby instead of fear. And just say, the pregnancy is going to go along the way it's going to go along, and we'll just deal with each part of it as it appears. And yeah, just allow herself to be treated during that 9 months and just enjoy that life that's growing within her. And a lot of times I'll tell the moms when they're pregnant too that what is developing inside of them is like a candle. And so the sheath of fascia has been put down and everything's developing inside of it. And if you took away, like if you decorate your candle with shells and stones, it's really pretty. But if you took away the shells and stones, you'd still have a candle. But if you melted all the wax, you wouldn't have a candle. And so that's how the fascial system is. The fascial system is actually the wax, and then the candle is inside of it.
I can picture that. I love that imagery that you shared. Really quick, something you had mentioned was it's not about the vitamins or the foods that you intake so much as it is about one, staying in that present moment, taking things day by day, and the pregnancy is going to be what it's going to be. And as long as you are sending love into that life and being that's growing inside of you, then the rest will take care of itself. Now, I think that we have a culture where, hey, you got to take your multivitamins and prenatal pills and all these things because it's for the baby, for the baby. And I think these are maybe fear-based things, in my opinion, and just my opinion. I don't know that that's anybody else's, but it's this culture that we created where it's like you got to take these pills or these things so that the development happens the best. I have read studies or heard of studies that one of the main links to postpartum depression is prenatal pills. So, can you speak on the things that you've known society to push and promote versus what you have actually been able to help with real pregnancies and infant development?
Yeah, probably one of the biggest things is that if a difficulty comes up during a pregnancy, the parents are usually not given a choice of what could be done. They're told what needs to be done. And sometimes things will self correct, not always, but you've got nothing to lose by receiving treatment beforehand. So, like, say the baby gets stuck. Maybe the baby is stuck under the mom's rib or, up against their pelvic bone because the mother's got tightness of her own in the pelvic floor. So, if the mother gets MFR treatment during the pregnancy, then her body is allowed to have more room and oftentimes will self correct the problem. So, not all problems need to be fixed. Some problems just need to be addressed in a different way and with a hands on approach as opposed to an oral approach of taking something orally.
I completely agree. And I think when we're both, conducting this podcast interview, that there's no pressure, right? Like we're very centered, we're just having a conversation. But in those moments, there is an influx of fear because you're like, hey, your baby is stuck here and this is what needs to be done. What would you tell to someone who's maybe going through this process where they haven't heard that yet? But you know that if that gets said, there's this impulse of fear. We have to do something right away. Otherwise, the worst thing's going to happen. What would you say to them?
Well, if they're in the moment and they have to make a decision immediately, I would hope that they would be given a choice of what that decision would be and that something would not just be done to them. So I think the more we educate people that there are treatments that can be done throughout the pregnancy to enhance the chance of these other difficulties not occurring is probably the best that we can do, is
I love
just to
that.
put the word out there that there is another thing that they could be receiving that might help.
I love that. It's enhance the chance. You might put that on a t-shirt. Enhance the chance of a non-complicated pregnancy. And I think what it comes down to is, you know, and maybe this is me just projecting this fear of like, when this happens, what do you say? Whereas what I'm hearing you say is, if you can get them treated throughout the whole process, then it's not up to this one moment. It's like you're preparing the body for these moments. And by doing myofascial release, you're just increasing this wiggle room so that if something were to pop up, it's not as strenuous on the mother's body and then the pregnancy for the infant or the newborn. And I think that just echoes kind of what we've been saying. I know that not only myself, but I've heard of other people who have been told certain things in the moment, and it makes you very fearful, and it makes you feel like you have to make a split-second decision, and you're weighing the good and the bad, and you're kind of being bullied into making a decision that is impulsive and based out of fear. And one common one that I hear is like tongue tie, where a baby's tongue is not moving the way it should. And the message that often gets spread is if you don't snip that so that the tongue can move better, they will develop speech problems down the line. And it's like any mother or father in that moment would not want their kids to have these speech impediments or these struggling things with their speech because obviously it's their baby. So then they make a decision to have this surgery that can't be undone. Whereas in myofascial release, that is something that we can treat. And it's one of those things where it's like you're making a decision now for something you hope doesn't happen 13 to 15 years down the road. Like that is purely based out of fear. Whereas what we've learned in myofascial release is it doesn't have to be that way. But then to get a surgery that you can't undo adds another level of trauma. And then there's no undo button on that, you know? And so for anyone who is going through any healthcare challenges, whether it's pregnancy or anything else, if it's not life threatening for you in that moment, you should always weigh your options. And sometimes I run into the wrong professionals who, are just trying to make a buck. And they will push these surgeries because that's how they generate their living and their revenue. I'm not judging them for that, but it's just not the way that I think it should be done. Whereas I think when you come across a professional who only educates you and then gives you the choice, then you're working with someone who I believe is looking for your best interest. They're not making the decisions for you. They're saying, hey, based on what's coming up, and in my experience, these are your options. And you have to make that decision. And it goes back to this principle that we stated in the beginning is you never want to lead or force. And so if you are ever feeling that one, the person that you're working with is leading and forcing you, trust that feeling. Okay. Don't fall into the impulse to recenter yourself. It's important to go to myofascial release, whether it's seminars or getting treated, so you know what it feels like to be centered. And that's where you can make the best decisions for yourself. That is where, when you're still and you're quiet, your intuition speaks to you. And it might not make sense on paper, but if you trust that intuitive voice, it will never lead you astray. What in your life have you had to listen to this intuitive voice over the louder, fearful voice?
Oh, let me think. Well, what I really wish is that I had known about myofascial release when I was pregnant. I had already had both my children when I was exposed to myofascial release. But probably the biggest thing is I had a ski injury and they brought the snowmobile. They took me down. They said, we'll put a brace on you. I said, no, thanks for bringing me down. I'm out of here. And I went out and just cradled the part of my body that had gotten injured. And I was back on the slope 4 days later.
Wow.
And just being able to recognize that we have a gift in our hands that allows our body to heal itself. And luckily, the scientific world is beginning to see that. I don't know if you noticed, but the program for the Fascial Congress in August is a speaker talking about the fascial system and the scientific approach that it is a continuous system that runs from our head to our toes and the front of our body to the back of our body. And then the next speaker is talking about how the fascial system contributes to trauma. And so we're starting to blend it together. And I've certainly seen that on a personal level with many, many clients where they will say, like, I've been through so many treatments and still have my pain. I'm still not able to, hike, climb, ride my bike. And after 4 to 6 sessions with myofascial release, they're able to resume the life they want to live.
That's huge. Now, when you got injured while skiing, like what did they say you had?
Oh, they said I'd pulled my quadricep, which is the muscle in the front of our thighs, and that I had to wear a knee brace for 6 to 8 weeks or I wouldn't be able to walk normally again.
Wow. Oh my goodness. And see, the thing is, as a physical therapist or as someone who's in this space, that is an absurd thought. But if you're not a physical therapist or you don't know body work or you're not in healthcare, you're just gonna trust what the person is saying. And it's
Yeah.
like all it is a pulled muscle. It's like not that big a deal. But then to add this layer of if you don't do this, you will never walk the same. ever again is like so fearful. And that's where I think we do need to continue speaking about this work, because it gives you this opportunity to live this life that you want to live, you know? And I can't believe that that's what was said to you. And good thing you knew better and you were back on the slopes. Because guess what? All I did was pull a muscle. Like it's not that big of a deal. But for someone to say, hey, and maybe there's liability, I don't know what went into that, but it's like, I can't believe that the words would follow that, where if you don't do this, you'll never walk the same way again, is like ludicrous to me. And that just goes to show, because you don't know what is possible. And that is a gift in itself. Because if you knew what it was going to be, you might not pursue the directions or the path to finding it. And in Myofascial Release, that lesson has been for me. I didn't know what this body of work was. I didn't know it was possible. But I was curious and I just kept coming back. And for anyone who's new, who is like me, not like Judy or anyone else, or like, oh, I knew this was the missing link. I was like, this can't be it. Like when someone is unwinding on stage, I'm like, this is what you saw was the missing link. I was like, that was not my experience. That it's okay. And it's like all paths lead to Rome. It's like you can just be yourself. And whether you get there quickly or slowly, it's not a race. You'll get there when you get there, and that's another lesson, where it's like, even when you've described pregnancy, it's like, don't put this extra pressure on yourself. You'll get there when you get there. Like it'll be what it's going to be. But to make it something that it's not, then there's going to be this internal struggle. So I just want to thank you for being open and honest. I've gleaned a lot of lessons through just this conversation. And then I know the more important step for me is to act on it. Awareness is the first step, but I would say that's like 10% of the process. The other 90% is actually integrating it and doing the things that are going to be the more helpful things. Now, before we get out of here, is there any last thing you would like to share with my audience?
No, just allow yourself to find a myofascial release therapist and just experience it for yourself and see if it's something that your body would benefit from.
Love that. And if someone's trying to find you to work with, how might they reach out to you?
They can go to the MFR directory, and I'm on there, or they can contact me at jrp@editc.org.
Perfect. Judy is based in the Seattle area, and so if you're in that Pacific Northwest and you need a great myofascial release therapist, especially if you need one for your kids working with pediatrics, she's a phenomenal therapist. She not only does this work, she teaches it, and most important, she embodies this work. So thank you so much for your time and your energy. I really appreciated this conversation.
Thank you for asking me.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Myofascial Health. I help myofascial release therapists create beautiful websites for their MFR practices, even if they aren't tech savvy. If you're just starting your MFR practice, or you're an experienced MFR practice owner, learn more about how I can help at www.myofascial.health/website.